All the cards for set 2 of Overdress got revealed, so you know what time it is. It's set review time. Let's take a look at what the cards of A Brush with the Legends can do for their respective nations. And today, we start with Dragon Empire.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review, and today we start the set reviews for set 2 A Brush with the Legends. And as stated in the intro, we're gonna start off with the cards for Dragon Empire. But an interesting thing to note of this particular set is that unlike most Vanguard set, and definitely what we've seen with the V-Series one, we don't really see the usual reprints or the introduction of new triggers. The only trigger that we're gonna see is the new front trigger, but it has a skill, so it isn't just a typical vanilla card. So most of the cards within the set review actually do something unique, but as we're gonna see for a lot of these set reviews, there are a lot of filler cards that we can brush very fast to the side. So with that said, let's jump straight into these cards, and we start off with, of course, the brand new front trigger in the likes of Blaze, Maiden, Parama. And this front trigger has the ability Continuous on Guardian Circle. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this unit gets shield plus 5k. So during the mid to late game, it's a 20k shield, thus making your Vanguard potentially 33k power. This for me is a solid 5-star card. Like, it's a awesome upgrade to the original front triggers, and being 20k shield is big, as most shield that we have access to are just 15k at the tops, and that little 5k extra can save you a lot of cards in hand, and it can also make sometimes guarding the Vanguard a lot easier, as it can help you to get to the 1 to pass or 2 to pass a lot more securely without dedicating more cards from hand. So an awesome upgrade, and some builds might definitely gonna run this card in their respective trigger lineup. Then follow up, we got a brand new common grade 1 in the likes of Blaze, Fist, Monk, Enten, and Enten has the ability on a regular circle. When the attack this unit boosted hits, cast Soulless 1 and retire this unit. Choose one of your units and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. Overall, I'm not too excited about this card. Like, you retire a unit and you use Soulless to just give a unit plus 10k power. Yes, in Dragon Empire you have the on-hit pressure on all your columns, so this can be nice to put more hit pressure, and it works to some extent with Valiente, as you can resend it, thus gaining more power or more value of the power increase. So there are some situations where you can use this, but because of a different card that was introduced in this set, I don't really think there's a lot of excuse to run this card in your list, as you have another card that has on hit pressure that can give you more value in the Overdress build with behind your Nirvana. So for me, this is going to be a 2-star card. Like, it's an interesting card, it might be useful to some extent, but it's not the greatest of cards, if we're going to be very honest. Now, follow up, we've got another grade 1, which is questionable, as we got Stealth Dragon Kizanreiji, and it has the ability act on rearguard circle once a turn, cost Counter plus 1 and Soul plus 1. Choose one of your opponent's rearguards in the same column as this unit and retire it. For me, it's going to be a 2-star. Like, it's fine, it's pinpoint removal, you can use it in Eugene, it's main phase, so it synergizes with Eugene to some extent, but Counter Blast, Soul Blast, it's still a bit too costly for my liking, but we're still at the early stages of Overdress, so maybe it's still warranted, but it's hard for me to justify it as a 2-star card, as a 3-star card, so that's why it's a 2-star card, because there's also an issue that it can only hit in the same column, so if it's already present on the board, your opponent can play around it, as they can put the cards that they want to keep on the board in the other columns. So it's still a bit restrictive, which can work against it. So for me, it's gonna be a 2-star card. The next one, we got a new grade 2 in the likes of Drag Raider Nasir, and it has the ability, although when a unit intercept, if your opponent has 2 or less rearguards, this unit gets shield plus 10k until the end of the battle. So a 15k shield interceptor, which can be nice, but the issue is that it needs to intercept, so you cannot use it from hand. On top of that is that it needs to have your opponent have 2 or less rearguards. They can just call more during their turn, thus negating the shield value. So not only is it vulnerable for control, as it needs to be on the field to get its shield value, but on top of that, every deck can just call new units to the field to just shut off this skill, and you cannot do anything about it. So for me, It's a 1-star card for that. It's inherently flawed. Then followed up, we've got a duo of new cards in the likes of the Blaze Maiden cards, as we got Blaze Maiden Zara, a brand new grade 1, and her ability is continuous Vanguard circle. During your turn, if Blaze Maiden Erger or Blaze Maiden Reno is on your Vanguard circle or Vanguard circle, this unit gets power plus 5k. She's a 6k base, which is kind of annoying, but she becomes an 11k attacker during grade 1 and grade 2 turns because of your right line. It's going to be those two specific units. So she can be an 11k booster for your Vanguard or just an attacker on the side columns, but it's way too specific, and you're not really gonna play Reiju and Reno in your main deck. Maybe Reno for a stronger offensive attacker in the early game, but that's a very specific tech choice. Most players don't use those cards, so it's kind of restrictive. And being an 11k makes it kind of awkward because it doesn't really make any good numbers with any units, except specifically for Reno, because Reno is a 12k attacker on the Vanguard and Vanguard circle, and 12 plus 11 is 23, thus hitting a magic number against a grade 3. But you're not playing Reno besides the right line, and when she's your Vanguard, you're not facing up against an opponent's grade 3 Vanguard, so that the 23k number doesn't really mean anything at that point. So for me, it's a 1-star card, as I don't really see a lot of useful applications for this particular unit. Then follow, we got the second card of this Blaze Maiden duo, as we got Blaze Maiden Tanya, and it has the ability Auto. When this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, cost counterblast 1, choose a grade 0 card from your drop and call to the rearguard circle. This effectively works nicely with Trickstar, as you have now another way besides your Vanguard to reoccur Trickstar to the field. The Vanguard costs you discard, so you don't plus. This costs a counterblast, so you do plus. But counterblast is kind of heavy, or a lot of value behind it in the Overdress build, so you need to make the right decision if this warrant the counterblast cost to just resurrect a Trickster. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But she also has a secondary effect, which is on the Vanguard circle. When its unit attacks, cost Soul plus 1, choose one of your grade 0 units, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of the turn. So you can make Trickster become a 10k attacker, or potentially you can use it with the generic starter, which then becomes 11k. So you have another couple of options accessible to you to basically flood the board. Now, on first glance, this skill doesn't seem all too great, but with the new Trickster engine that's going to come up, as we're going to see with the more cards for Overdress at the end of this video, it is actually pretty useful. So for the way to have another way to reoccur a unit to the field with Trickstar, and a way to buff it so you can be a bit more aggressive. And keep in mind, you can do this also on turn 2. So there is actually some way to be a lot more aggressive, as you go into Superior Call Trickster to the field 100% of the time, and then by using this skill you can buff it up to a 10k attacker or 10k booster and be a lot more aggressive in the early game, thus ramping out more damage. So with the whole package in mind, as well as the potential future interaction with the new card for the Overdress archetype, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Then follow up, we got a new generic grade 3 in the likes of Volcanic Gun Dragon, which has the ability on a rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, if your opponent has no front or rear guards, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle. So it's an 18k attacker. Yeah, for me, this is going to be a 1-star card. Like, an 18k attacker on a grade 3 doesn't really mean a lot unless you have specifically a 10k booster behind it. But the restriction is also kind of annoying because you specifically need to play Eugene to actually make it matter. Now, for Eugene, this could potentially be useful as it's just a bit stronger, but in the likes of a grade 3 rearguard, just a 5k extra, I don't really think it is good enough. But as seen as that most of Eugene's rearguards are kind of underwhelming, this might actually make the cut, but overall, in just pure value-wise, I don't think it's more than just a 1-star, which is a shame, because the artwork is phenomenal. Now, with those generic cards out of the way, let's take a look at the new right line and its support as we enter the new encounter card archetype of Dragonic Overlord for Dragon Empire. And we first start off with our starter, which is Lizard Runner Undo, which has the generic starter skill, although when its unit is rode upon, if you went second, draw a card. It's going to be a 1-star, as it's just a generic starter. There's no real reason to play it, and there's no benefit from it. It's just for in the right line. Then, if we move up to the grade 1, we see Embodiment of Armor Bar, and it has the ability Auto. When this unit is rode upon by Dragon Knight Nahalem, cost counterblast 1, search your deck for up to 1 grade 1 card, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So it's a grade 1 searcher on your right line. This is really good because you can search out any tech card that you need for a specific scenario. We got the Persona Right Searcher, which is great. We can search out our PGs, which is also great. We got a new grade 1, which allows to countercharge, yes, Countercharge in Dragon Empire, which this card can search out. We also have a card that can put itself in the soul as a discard fodder. We can search it out, and next turn for the right line, discard and put it into the soul. There are a lot of synergies here to be had, and this skill will only become better and better and better with more grade 1s being introduced. And this is already really powerful. But on top of that, we also have Auto Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, when your Vanguard attack hits, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it can become a 13k attacker or booster, which is nice, but your Vanguard needs to hit, so it's kind of restricted. Now, with the Dragonic Overlord playstyle, it's not that hard to pull it off, but there are scenarios where it won't activate, and it's just sitting there, which can be a bit lackluster. So, with that whole package in mind, it's obviously a 5-star card. Like, there's no denying that first skill is ridiculously good and will only get better, and its secondary effect is decent enough that it's also useful to just run it in your main deck to apply more pressure on the field, especially since your Vanguard can potentially restand, so having more behind that on hit pressure and the extra power buff that you can generate. So overall, a pretty good card. Then if we move up in the right line, we see Dragon Knight Nahalem, and its abilities are auto. When this unit is rode upon by a unit with Overlord in its card name, call this card to the Vanguard Circle. So it's a 3+1 that costs you a soul. That's nice, especially since its other skill, because you want to have it on the Vanguard Circle, which is act on Vanguard Circle once a turn. If you have a Vanguard with Overlord in its card name, cost Soul Blast 1, and this unit and all of your Vanguards get power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it's a field buffer, and for 1 soul you get 10k power on the field, and it's spread across 2 columns, which can be a lot better in certain circumstances, as it can potentially overcome a defensive threshold, and your opponent needs to waste a lot more shield than if it was just plus 10k to 1 column. So overall, I think this is a solid 4-star card. Like, it umps a lot of pressure, it's solid as a right line because you get a 3+1, which is always an issue for Dragon Empire or for Kagerou's playstyle, so this is great. But then it immediately synergizes nicely with Overlord, as you can immediately power up your new grade 3 Vanguard and himself, making potentially a 23k column, or if bars behind it, potentially 28k column, besides your Vanguard that's going to swing potentially twice. So it's a nice setup card. It's not as instrumental as Bar in my opinion, but it's still a very good card to have nonetheless. Then follow up, we've got the main boss unit of this new ride line, which is of course Dragonic Overlord. And Dragonic Overlord has the abilities continuous Vanguard to Rearguard Circle. During the battle this unit attacked a rearguard, your opponent cannot call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle. Now this is important because of course Bar's ability, because this increases the consistency or the chance of Bar's ability to activate and gaining that free power, which is nice, and it potentially removes an opponent's units. The only issue is that this skill can be guarded if your opponent has interceptors or potentially blitz orders, because this card doesn't stop blitz orders. So there is a potential for it to not activate, but the chances are very slim. The reason why this skill, besides Bar, is so instrumental or so important is because of Overlord's second ability, which is Auto and Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, when his unit attack hits, cost counter plus 1, and discard a card from your hand, stand this unit, and it gets drive -1 until the end of turn. So it's a restander that is behind an unhit. Now because of its first ability, it basically allows you to almost secure the restand, and while doing that you remove one of your opponent's units, and it basically becomes a pseudo retire skill, which can be nice. And in certain circumstances, if you know your opponent doesn't have a lot of shield value, you can just ram into their Vanguard and then reset the Vanguard and then ram in them again, which can be great, especially if maybe they guard it but you get the over trigger, restand it and attack again, and they probably cannot guard, and now you restand your Vanguard again. So it can be quite deadly. And the interesting part about this skill is that it doesn't cost you cards from hand, because you discard 1 but you still have that single drive check, so it's effectively also become a cycle. So in disguise, it's potentially a retire of your opponent's rearguard and a cycle, while you are also turning that cycle in an extra drive check, which can be very good. But with it all said and done, I think I can only give Dragonic Overlord a 4-star card. Like, for a boss unit, it's not that explosive or that amazing for your whole engine itself, as it's still a 13k Vanguard. You can Persona ride, but on the first turn it's just 13k. It's dependent on the Harlem to make it 18k or potentially 23, and then the booster behind it to make it a lot better. And even though it can potentially retire one of your opponent's rearguards and you can potentially cycle 1 card, you can never really effectively pressure your opponent's Vanguard twice, because they can easily just perfect guard it, and then this whole skill just shuts off. So if your opponent doesn't call anything in the early turns, you potentially can just attack with the Vanguard DPG, and that's basically the end of your first turn. Which can be a big lackluster, and that's where I have my issue with Dragonic Overlord, and that's why I'm not giving it a 5-star status. It's still solid, but it's not as insanely as some other boss units like, for example, Bastion or Bruce, which can pack a lot of punch because of their inherent synergy with the whole archetype. But that said, Overlord isn't alone. It got a couple of support cards, and these support cards are pretty damn good. Because first off, we got the grade 2 Berserk Dragon, which has the ability on a rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, if you have a Vanguard with Overlord in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle. Then, cost, counter plus 1, choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rearguards and retire it. So, spot removal, and it becomes a solid 15k attacker, potentially 23k column, which is always really good. And it's basically as cost effective as Overlord, as you use one counterblast to retire one unit of your opponent's field. Now, Overlord is going to hit potentially into the front row unit. This can just snipe one of their back row boosters, which can be really great to just get rid of those annoying cards. So overall, Berserk Dragon for me is a solid 4-star card because it's finally a good retire card, as retire something for a counterblast is honestly pretty damn good. Sadly, it's restrictive behind the Overlord, so Eugene cannot yank this card into their deck. But who knows, maybe Eugene players make it work by using a weird hybrid build, but that's to the Eugene players to figure that one out. And then beyond it, we got another support card, which is incidentally also really good in Dragon Empire as a generic sense, because we got this grade 1 Dragon Monk Gojo, and its ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When the attack this unit boosts, a Vanguard hits, cost, retire this unit, and counter charge 1. So retire, counter charge 1. That's really good, because if you use this behind Dragonic Overlord, of course, if you hit into a rearguard, it increases the consistency of potentially hitting, so you can use Overlord skill, counter plus 1, restand it and whatnot, and then immediately refund that counterblast by retiring Gojo, which is great synergy. But beyond that, it can work in Eugene, but more importantly, it also works nicely with Nirvana. Because if you put this thing behind Nirvana and you attack, usually Nirvana is the attack that most players just let through because a Valiente might be on the board. Yeah, now they cannot really allow that, because if they allow that, you get that free counter charge. And one counterblast in a Overdress deck is ridiculously in the amount of value it can generate. It can be an entire plus 10k to the front row, it can be 2 draws, it can potentially be a restand on a rearguard, it can be a Persona Right Searcher, and the things are endless in the amount of value you generate. So now you can put the unhit pressure also behind the Vanguard, which already comes with the potential crit pressure. So Gojo is a great card for the generic sense for Dragon Empire and will be used probably in a lot of variants. But that said, I will only give this card a 3-star because it's just resource and it's not the insane amount of resource. It's just the fact that Dragon Empire finally gets a counter charge that makes it insane. But it still costs you a rearguard because you lose a card from the field to get that counter charge, and it can only work specifically behind the Vanguard, and it's still behind a non-hit. So it's still your opponent that's going to dictate if you're going to get that counter charge or not. So in some situations, even though Gojo might look like an amazing card on paper, it might actually do absolutely nothing. And if you already have a booster behind your Vanguard, you're potentially forced to call Gojo on top of it and lose even more cards in the process to potentially get its counter charge. So that's why for me it's going to be a 3-star card for what it is right now. Now on top of that, we got another resource card, which incidentally works really nicely for Dragonic Overlord as well, as we got Stealth Dragon Togachirashi. And Togachirashi has the ability, although when this card is discarded from your hand during your turn, you would put this card into your soul. So it's free soul. This can potentially work with Eugene, as Eugene is going to need the soul. Overdress is going to need the soul a lot, especially with the new support, so this could be nice. And of course, Dragonic Overlord with Nahalem use also a lot of soul, so this is great. Now this card can be activated for the right line, which any build can utilize. But beyond that, only Nirvana and Overdress can actively activate this skill. Overdress have Nirvana's ability to resurrect Trickster, which costs a discard, and of course Valiente also costs a discard, so you can activate and put this card in the soul via Do's Meat. And then Dragonic Overlord has Dragonic Overlord's restand ability. And for Dragonic Overlord, you can actually combo this nicely with Bar, as Bar can potentially search out Togachirashi, and then the moment that you're going to ride up into Dragonic Overlord, you can discard this card to immediately put it into the soul, so you have the soul cost for the Halan. So there are some really nice synergies within this card, but overall it's still going to be for me a solid 3-star card because it's still just generic resource engine and it's very specific in its usage. Depending on your build, it might not really be that great at all because the only way that you're going to get benefit from this card is by specifically discarding it. So you cannot guard with it and you cannot attack with it as well because you're going to lose a lot of value from the card. Especially seeing as it's just a 7k body, which is kind of annoying. But overall, this card is going to see play a lot of the time. But just for its skill's sake, I don't think it's too amazing of a card. It's just that in the current circumstances, you're going to play it because a lot of the cards are going to need soul. And there aren't really a lot of ways for Dragon Empire to gain soul besides playing with the Eugene cards. Now on top of that, we got another card that can potentially work with Dragonic Overlord as we got Cross Rock Dragon. And this grade 2 has the ability, auto, when a unit is placed in the rearguard circle, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and you may move it to your opponent's open front row rearguard circle. So effectively, it's a Narukami skill, and the reason why it worked nicely with Dragonic Overlord is because they have no units in the front row. You can just pull their boosters to the front row and then attack with Overlord into them to forcefully get that restand skill off as well. Besides that, this card is kind of underwhelming and probably won't see any use because there isn't really inherent synergy by pulling units to the front row because most retire skills in Dragon Empire don't really care where they are. So yeah, for me it's going to be a 2-star card just by the fact that it can work for Overlord, but it's not too great. Then, with Dragonic Overlord out of the way, let's take a look at the new cards that we got for Eugene, as Eugene got 2 new specific support cards in this set, which are actually really good and probably the best rearguards Eugene got if we even look at set 1. Because these cards are just good, and mainly I was saying that because the set 1 rearguards for Eugene were just that bad. But first of all, we got this grade 1, which is Vairina Erger, and it has the ability Act on Rearguard Circle. If your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, cost counter plus 1 and perform one of the following. This unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn, or put this unit into your soul, choose one of your opponent's grade 2 rearguards and retire it. So this is more spot removal that synergizes with Eugene because you can use Eugene's rest ability and then immediately retire more stuff and then use the skill to retire more stuff. You can rest this card just like the right line of Eugene's grade 1 and then put it into the soul, which is great for more resources and to retire more stuff. It's the same cost, but on top of that, if you don't hit this card for the rest ability and it stays on the board, or potentially you call it off of the superior call skill of Eugene, you can just give it extra power. And keep in mind, it's not once per turn, so if you have a couple of counterblasts left and this is one of your final turns, you can just keep counterblasting, giving it 10k, 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 so it becomes a strong booster or beater and just go ham. Now, interesting enough, you can use this in Overlord and potentially some other builds, maybe Overdress, because there are ways to retire your opponent's rearguards during the main phase with other skills. Now, most of those cards aren't really cost effective and you're probably not going to run it because of that, but it's another option to potentially play. But Eugene will get the most bang for your buck from this card because of Eugene's inherent synergy. Now, overall, for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card because it's great for synergy with Eugene. There might be some generic synergy as well, but the fact that this card is very flexible and you can use it in 2 different ways means you have way more potential of actually gaining value of this card, unlike the grade 1 of the right line, which is very specific in usage. This card is a bit better, and yes, it's a 5k unit, but if you give it a 10k power, it becomes 15k, which is as strong as most of the grade 1 or grade 2 attackers for Eugene, which isn't behind an annoying restriction where your opponent needs to have an X amount of cards on the field. So this might actually be way more useful than you might think. Now, as for the second support card for Eugene, we got Strong Fortress Dragon Jibra Brachio, and Jibra Brachio has the ability Act on Rearguard Circle. If your Vanguard is Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene, cost, Soul Dust 1, and rest this unit, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So more spot removal, and this time for a Soul Blast, which honestly is really good. You don't really want to waste too much counterblast, as we got now other skills that use counterblast, and yes, Eugene needs to use the Soul to Superior Call, but in some circumstances, you don't really want to use its Superior Call because it's too RNG reliant and you might not really get good value off of it. And if you can just use it for retire, I honestly think that's way better because retire is a lot stronger than most people give credit to. And this is a very cost efficient way to retire. Yes, you need to rest this unit, but as we're going to see in a second, that might not be an issue. Because we have the other ability of this card, which is on a rearguard circle. At the start of your battle phase, if your opponent has 1 or less rearguards, stand this unit, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it can immediately restand itself, and it becomes a 15k attacker, which is really nice. Now, your opponent to have 1 or less rearguards might be a bit too heavy and annoying, but keep in mind, you can rest 2 with Eugene, you snipe 1, you can use the ability, you snipe 2. With Eugene's rest ability, you can potentially use maybe the grade 1 that we just talked about, or the grade 1 from the right line, which can counter plus 1 and to retire another unit. That itself is already 3 retires. Most players don't have a full field, and if they just have 4 rearguards, that is enough to activate this skill. But potentially you might have 2 of this card, and then you can actually go beyond that, and even if they have a full field of rearguards, you still can activate the skill, and they still can restand. But in a situation where your opponent just has 1 or 2 rearguards, you can just rest these 2 grade 2s with Eugene's ability, just snipe 1 of their units, and then immediately go into the battle phase, and they reset themselves, and they get plus 5k power, and you're basically done. The synergy with this card is kind of ridiculous, and it makes Eugene a lot better. So for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card. Yes, it's very specific to Eugene, but I think these are the type of skills Eugene is going to need to make the deck actually competitively viable. Hopefully in set 3 we're going to see more cards like this, because Eugene, I think, just needs a little bit more love to make it really good. Now, with the Eugene love train out of the station, let's go over the new Overdress cards and see what Vairina, Trickstar and Nirvana have in store for us for set 2. And we start off with an interesting grade 2, which is Armor Dragon Mount Cannon. And this 8k grade 2 has the ability auto on front or rearguard circle. When your grade 0 unit attacks, this unit and the unit that attack gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now remember the grade 2 of the Blaze Maiden that we talked about at the beginning of this video, that can Soul Blast 1 to give one of the units grade 5k power. This basically does the exact same thing, but it's for free, and it gives itself 5k power, so turning itself into a 13k attacker, and a Trickstar potentially into a 10k attacker. So this skill is a bit better than that particular skill, but the grade 2 had one thing going for itself, and it's the effect that it could allow you to resurrect that Trickstar in the first place to get the unit onto the board. Of course, Mount Cannon can be used on turn 2 when you just superior call the Trickstar with the right line, which can be great for just early aggression, but it's very specific, and besides that, you don't really want to call this card to the front row, because your front row is dedicated for your Overdress cards. So for that sake, it's going to be a 2-star card for me. Like, it's not the greatest of cards, but I can see unit players to play with it. Maybe it's going to be a 1-of or 2-of just for those early turns, for those aggression plays potentially being a thing. But besides that, yeah, not the greatest of cards. But a great card is this grade 3 Blaze Fist Monk Daimari. And Daimari has the skill Auto Rearguard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked, cost counter plus 1 and soul plus 1, choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and retire it. And if your Vanguard is struck or Vart to Divine Dragon Nirvana, choose up to 1 grade 0 card from your drop and call it to the rearguard circle. 1 counter blast, 1 soul blast is 1 retire. Most cards in Dragon Empire are of that value, so that is fine. Or at least not that great, but it's acceptable. But on top of that, it now gives you a plus because it gives you a card in the field, which then is actually pretty fine in value. But the crazy thing about it is that it's during the battle phase, so it enables you potentially multi-attack. Yes, Trickster is a 5k, but if you have a booster behind it, it can be a 13k attack, still hitting for solid numbers if they didn't hit the defensive. And if it was during a Persona right turn, it's 23, and now you don't care for them hitting a defensive trigger, which is pretty insane. And that's just talking about this card in a generic sense of an 8k booster behind it, and just calling a Trickster and leave it at that. That in itself makes this card playable, in my opinion. It makes it playable and decent enough because you give Overdress a multi-attack engine, which is great. Besides, of course, the on-hit of Valiente. But that's not even thinking about the synergy with the cards that we're going to talk about in a second. So, this for me is a solid 4-star card. It's amazing, it's great. The only thing that goes against it a little bit is just the cost of this card. The Counterblast, we know about Nirvana. Counterblast is very cost heavy, and it does justify it, but because all the other cards in the deck also use Counterblast, you might not have the room to actually use it. And Soul Blast, yes, Soul isn't that significant right now, but with the new playstyle, it actually is, and that makes this card kind of limited in usage. But besides that, it's still a ridiculous card. but it's just because this card enables a different play, which is kind of crazy. So let's take a look at the other cards that makes this card a lot better and see the insane new engine that Overdress is going to get out of this set. So first off, we have a grade 1, which is Maiden Aruna, and her skill is very simple. It's continuous Vanguard circle. During the battle, this unit boosted to grade 0. This unit gets power plus 5k. So we just talked about a grade 1 behind Trickstar makes it a 13k column. This makes it into an 18k column, and that is actually pretty huge, because this now forces your opponent to waste 2 cards because it's 10k shield, or they potentially need to waste a trigger, which is actually overguarding the attack, which is great. You're forcing more cards from your opponent's hand for free. It doesn't cost you anything, and this is just a normal 8k booster for other attacks, so you can slam it down in the early game, and during your multi-attack combos, you're going to benefit from this, which is awesome. It's very good synergy-wise with the new Overdress build. But if your Persona ride that turn, it's 28k, and 28k is pretty good number, because that means one trigger isn't enough anymore. So where the normal Trickstar for 23 could be blocked with the trigger, it cannot be when you use this card behind it. So overall, Aruna is a great card for early aggression, and you can use it even on the early turns when you need to call Trickstar to the field when you're going through your ride line, so you're even more aggressive. So it works with the early game, and it works great during the mid-late game. So for that, this is for me a solid 3-star card. It's a great card for the new multi-attack engine, and even for just the generic sense of Overdress. But it all comes together if we take a look at the new main triple R for Overdress, which is Vairina Erger, or Elgar, or whatever they're going to name it once it's going to be printed. For now, it's Erger. But the great thing is its name, it's its skills. And first off, it's got auto from hand. At the end of the battle, your Trickstar attacked a Vanguard. If your Vanguard is struck or fought, Divine Dragon Nirvana, costs Soulbus 2. Overdress this card on your Trickstar on the rearguard circle as stand and counter charge 1. What? Like, Soulbus 2 to multi-attack for me is actually already good enough. It's good enough for Overdress because if its second ability, which is continuous on rearguard circle and guardian circle, this unit gets, if this unit's in the Overdress state, this unit gets power plus 10k and shield plus 10k. So it's a 20k attacker that multi-attacks for 2 Soul Blast. That's, in my opinion, already good enough. But on top of that, they give you the counter charge. That, in my opinion, is breaking this card beyond belief. Because now, if you have 1 counter blast, you can use the grade 3 to multi-attack into the Trickstar, then a Trickstar can go into this Vairina Erger, you counter-charge that counter-blast, and then you can attack with the Vanguard, counter-blast 1 and give the entire front row 10k power, and now this Erger will attack for 30k. And you have potentially another Overdress card to the other side that then also swings for a significant amount of number. You did that by using 1 counterblast and 3 soul. Yes, the 3 soul might be a bit heavy, but we have ways to get soul, so there are ways to compensate that for a little bit. So overall, this is kind of ridiculous, and to stretch more home how ridiculous this is, you can call Trickstar to the field. You have the grade 1 behind that we just talked about, so it's an 18k attack, potentially 28k, and the moment you did that, you can then ride into Erger, and Erger is going to be a 30k attack, but before that you have your Vanguard that swings, and another column to the side that also swings. And if you want to go even more crazy, you can extend this one more attack if you have the grade 3, because that grade 3 is going to attack as a 13k attacker, it resurrects Trickstar on top of itself, then you can attack with the booster for a 18k, maybe 28k attack, and then you're going to superior ride or superior Overdress into Erger, and that can attack again, but you also have your Vanguard attack and an attack to the side column. If you have for some reason a crap ton of soul, you can do it also on the other column. So it's kind of ridiculous how strong this card is. You're going to give multi-attack of decent sizable numbers here to Overdress. So it's kind of ridiculous. But on top of that, it's also a 15k shield interceptor. That's not that bad. Yes, it's susceptible for your opponent's retire skills, but if they don't have that, you're probably not going to attack into it because it's still a 20k body, so it's kind of hard to get rid of it. So overall, it's an insane card, and for me, it's obviously a 5-star card. There's no question behind it. This card is ridiculous, and it's going to make the Overdress deck really good. And also a lot more fun. It opens up a lot of interesting ways to build the deck, play the deck, and experiment with the deck. So yeah, I'm very excited about this card and I cannot wait to see how far I can take the Overdress build with the inclusion of Vairina Erger. But of course that isn't everything, because we also got a couple of more order cards. And first off, we got this specific Overdress order, which is Horn of Blessing, a grade 3 normal order. And its ability reads as: play this with cost, discard a card with the Overdress ability from your hand, draw 2 cards. So it's basically a cycle card. You discard 2 cards, you discard the order card and an Overdress card, and then draw into 2 new cards. Honestly, this is really good, because this just synergizes really nicely with your right line. Because keep in mind, the moment that you write your Vanguard, you're gonna get Vairina to your hand. But Vairina is just there to get a free plus of the right line itself. Now, you can use this order card and trade in that Vairina for 2 new cards that maybe are a Arcs, or an Elgar, or maybe a Valiente, or just your Persona right or more shield or whatever. This is actually a really nice card to just increase the consistency of your deck, because you just go faster through your deck. Yes, you need to discard a specific card, but let's keep in mind, the moment that you can activate this card on turn 3, you're going to have an Overdress card 100% of the time, just by the sheer fact that your right line exists. And even if you don't use your right line because you want to conserve your soul, you probably have drawn into other Overdress cards by this point, because you're going to run a significant amount of Overdress cards. So for me, this is going to be a solid 3-star card that just increase the consistency of your deck, which is always good to have. And who knows, maybe it can be run as an engine in other decks to just go faster through your deck if you need to see specific cards, which can be really interesting. But on top of that, we also have a grade 2 normal order in the likes of Flame Dragon Bomber, and it has the ability: choose one of your Vanguards, and until the end of the turn, it gets continuous Vanguard Circle. When all of your units would attack, they may attack your opponent's back row rearguard. So now you can snipe their back row with your units. Overall, I'm not too excited about this card. I'm going to give it a 2-star card, because you don't really want to waste your limited amount of attacks into your opponent's back row, especially as you have usually retire skills that can just get rid of them, which is a lot better. Yes, Overlords can use this to potentially hit into their back row units if you want to get more consistent access to the restand if they have no front row units. But we have already the Cross Rock Dragon, the grade 2, that can pull them to the front row, which might be a lot better, because it doesn't cost you discard, and B, it gives you a 10k body onto the board, which also is a 5k shield, which potentially, or probably, is a lot better than this card. You can run this to just have more ways to get rid of their back row units and to have more consistent access of Overlord, but besides that, it's very specific in very niche in usage. So currently I don't really see the use of this card, but maybe with more multi-tag and maybe lower multi-tag, this can become useful, as it circumvents potentially an opponent's defensive trigger, as you then can go for the back row to still get value of all your attacks. And then finally, we got a brand new Blitz order in the likes of this grade 2, Prayers That Will Reach Someday. And its ability reads as: play this with cost, soulless 1. If you have a rearguard with the Overdress ability, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 15k until the end of the battle. So this is basically a different version of the already Blitz order that we got, which is, I believe, also grade 2. The only difference is that this costs a soulless, the other one is free, but this has a restriction that you need to have an Overdress unit, which you probably will always have. The other one is that you need to be at limit break free. Depending on your scenario, you might go for one of the other. At the beginning, I was really fan about this card, because you can use it in the early game and you don't really use a lot of souls, so you don't really mind, and being able to guard your Overdress units is still very important, so this could be great. But with Vairina Erger now being announced, and we know it's going to use a crap ton of soul, yeah, I'm not so much fan of this card anymore, because you don't really have the soul for using this card if you're going to rely on Erger. So for me, it's going to be a 2-star card. It's still potentially useful. It might be useful in the future once we go away from Erger with more Vairinas on the horizon. But as things stand right now, it's kind of underwhelming. But with that said, we've seen all the new cards, and we discussed all the new cards for Dragon Empire. As we've seen, we got a lot of interesting things for Dragon Empire. Not only do we have the new right line with Dragonic Overlord, which is pretty interesting, and it brought a lot of interesting tools with it, but we also got some actually good support for Eugene, which can make the deck a lot more consistent, but I think it just needs a little bit more tools to make the deck actually competitively viable. But beyond that, we got a bomb drop or a bombshell coming down on us with the new support for Overdress. It's ridiculous what Erger brings to the deck. It opens up so many options and it makes the deck really, really fun. Let's hope that next time Eugene get the same amount of love. But we see the new Vairina, and I'm kind of scared that this will never happen. But who knows? Maybe that's Vairina, and we get 2 new cards for Overdress, and the rest is going to be all the new rage for Eugene, and maybe a little bit for Dragonic Overlord. Who knows? Things might change in set 3. But right now, set 2 is looking extremely spicy, and I cannot wait to actually play with these cards. But if any of these cards have struck your fancy, don't forget you can order these cards or pre-order these cards over at parkage.com, and you can use the discount code TIMELY5 to get 5% discount on your entire order, so you can get your cards as cheap as possible, because we all know a TCG cardboard hobby is kind of expensive, so every penny that we can save will go a long way. But with that said, let me know in the comments down below which new cards for Dragonic Empire you're the most excited for, and which cards you cannot wait to get your hands on to upgrade in your deck. Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/DragonInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/DragonInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!